Japan's most powerful entertainment mogul. The abuse allegations go back over 5 decades. The company that Kitagawa founded, Johnny and Associates, has been forced to close, and the management has formed a new company called Smile Up to handle compensation victims. This entire process was arguably kick-started by our 2 guests on the screen who got up very early in London, I think, to join us today. Their blockbuster BBC documentary last year included interviews with several of Kitagawa's victims, including Kawa Nokomoto, who subsequently gave a press conference here at the FCCJ almost exactly a year ago. From there, the story was picked up by the Japanese media, and the code of omerta, or silence, surrounding Kitagawa's wrongdoings was broken forever. The 2 speakers, Mobeen Azhar and Megumi Inman, are here again today to discuss the fresh allegations that they have made in the documentary, which you've just seen an extract from. They 2 more individuals were sexually abused at Johnny and Associates. Of course, their latest documentary includes victims saying that the process set up for compensating victims is slow and opaque, and of course you've also seen claims that the company is trying to deflect by saying that some of the claims are fraudulent. So my job is to get out of the way as always and let the speakers speak. I don't know who's going to go first. Is it Megumi or Megumi?
Yeah.
Okay, so Megumi's going to go first. They're going to make a statement and then we'll open up to questions. Megumi, onegaishimasu.
Hi, thank you very much, David. Hi, everyone, and thank you to the FCCJ again for having us here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. As David said, a year ago, we were here with the release of Predator, The Secret Scandal of J-Pop, which was a documentary that investigated the sexual allegations against Johnny Kitagawa. And since that broadcast, I think a lot has happened, and we can see some changes, some of which, again, David has mentioned. But I think one of the big ones is that the allegations against Johnny Kitagawa are no longer a taboo. We're talking about that openly now. Johnny and Associates, of course, has dissolved, and Julie Fujishima has resigned. But I also think that there is hopefully a greater awareness of how systemic sexual abuse can take place, what grooming is, and also around male sexual abuse too.
Morning. It's really good to be with you, or good afternoon for you. I think as we saw these changes, it'd be fair to say we were really pleased with the impact that Predator had, but we also had a lot of questions, and week on week, month on month, we saw these headlines, and we of course were watching them from afar. We were watching them from London, and we were seeing this story unfold. And as it unfolded, I'd say for every question that there was an attempt to answer, there were many more questions that arose. So primarily those questions were around things like the treatment of survivors. In the introduction, David, you referenced that almost 1,000 men have now come forward to Smile Up, saying that they were survivors of abuse, that they were abused by Johnny Kitagawa. So we had really serious questions about that process, how those individuals were being treated, and the process in terms of how and if they were being compensated. We also had questions about the care towards talent today, and that was fueled by many of the discussions online. It was fueled by some of the stories. It was also fueled by individuals who had historically worked at the agency, who'd been in touch with myself and Megumi as well. And so there were also major questions about the possibility of other abusers within the company, and the major question of if this all came down to one individual, Johnny Kitagawa, who of course many people at the time said, you know, he is dead and therefore there isn't any accountability. Did this problem indeed die with him, or was there a culture of abuse that had continued after he'd gone, or, you know, were there other people at the company at the time? So all of those questions led us to the making of the follow-up documentary, The Shadow of a Predator. We were over in Japan in February to film that. It went out, of course, at the end of March, alongside an extended interview with Noriyuki Higashiyama, which is available on the BBC Japan YouTube page. once again, we are really grateful to everyone that contributed. So primarily that's everyone that's been affected by the abuse and the family members of those who've been affected by the abuse. We really realized whilst we were making this story that the subject matter is in need of a lot of TLC within Japan, and this story is far from over. It is still in many ways an unfolding story, and as a result of that, I think we both feel indebted to people who continue to speak out. We feel indebted to the press that continues to cover this story inside Japan, and I think we want to ensure from a moral perspective that that pressure doesn't evaporate and that the story continues to be reported on. I know you've all just seen the film, so I'll stop talking and I'll open up for questions, if that's okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those opening statements. Okay, well, we're opening it up to questions. If you would like to ask a question, just indicate by showing your hand and come to the microphone. いいですか? If while they're yeah, Japanese is okay. Do we have an interpreter? No. All right. Yeah. どうぞ.
すみません、東京新聞の望月と申します。聞きたい点はですね、2人別のジャニー喜多川以外の加害者を東山さんが認識していると聞いて、モビーン記者は非常に驚いていました。で、警察に情報提供しないのかと再三繰り返し聞いても、そのことについては、オプションの一つという言い方をして、現在でも警察に届けているような状況ではないようです。このことについて感じること、それから今、日本の警視庁を含め警察ですね、捜査機関がこのことについてまだ捜査しているという話もありません。この状況をどう思うか。そして4月から今月から、日本の中では新たに10本の、スマイルアップ所属のジャニーズ事務所所属だったタレントたちが新たな主役などを張るテレビが始まっている。この今の日本のメディアの状況をどう思うか。この3つをお願いします。
So I'm going to interpret Mochizaki from Tokyo Shimbun. And first of all, she wanted to ask Mr. Mobeen Azhar that when you interviewed Mr. Higashiyama, he told you that he is aware of two other suspects, but he asked about whether he's going to put those information forward to the police. He kind of refused and tried to get out of running out of the question, and he didn't commit to a report to the police. And so what's your sense on those reactions? That's the number one question. And second one is that when it comes to the police investigation, Japanese police hasn't at all tried to investigate anything on Johnny and associate matter, in spite of the new fact that they are aware of two other suspects who are still alive today. So what do you make of those action or inaction by police department in Japan, perhaps compared to the London police in the case of the Jimmy Savile? And the third, so now Johnny and Associate, also they changed the name, they kind of back on track with huge help from the TV stations. And the Japanese TV stations are now airing 10 new TV programs starring Johnny and Associate former talents. So what do you make of those the action by Japanese media, especially TV stations?
Thank you so much for your questions. So I think primarily in regard to the first question and the interview with Higashiyama-san, I got the real sense of an individual who may have lots of good intention, but is not equipped to deal with the magnitude of what has happened and these ongoing allegations. I was really shocked, actually, by the candid response when we posed the question about possible other abuses. He was very aware and he volunteered this information that there were 2 other people that an internal investigation had uncovered. And as you referenced, he went on to say this information hadn't been passed on to the police. He very much saw it as the responsibility of the individuals, as you would have seen in the film just now, the individuals who were making the allegations. And to his credit, he said, if they take this information to the police, Smile Up will cooperate. I have to say, from my perspective, this is simply not good enough, because we know from speaking to survivors of abuse in any context, and certainly in the Japanese context, there is a huge amount of stigma if someone has experienced abuse. I know from speaking to individuals that many of these people found it very, very difficult to speak to their families, their wives. Up until this day, that information hasn't been shared in some of these cases. So if you can imagine the weight and the difficulty in taking information like that and reporting it to the police, I think we all, and Smile Up in particular, who of course been tasked with delivering compensation and supporting survivors of abuse, need to take on some of that burden. And that means facilitating these complaints and facilitating justice. And in order for justice, any semblance of justice to be achieved, these individuals must be encouraged to report what happened to the police. I do want to reference one very specific thing, that Higashiyama-san was asked during the interview if the alleged new abusers are still alive, and he confirmed that they are, which to me suggests that there needs to be a thorough investigation, and if that results in police action and convictions, then that can only be a good thing. In regard to the second part of that question, can I hand over to you, Mobeen? Would that be okay?
So the second question
yeah, sure.
is about,
I think the second...
just to refresh, the second question is about police inaction, yeah?
Can I was going to hand over to you about the start to and kind of where we are now, but if I answer the second part of that question first and then Mobeen go for the third. So in terms of police in action, I would not for a second, and I've been very careful during this whole process, I would not for a second hold up the UK as a model. So I'm not suggesting everything would be dealt with in a textbook perfect way in the UK. I do know, however, that after the many allegations were made about Jimmy Savile, of course there's comparisons there because Jimmy Savile was also dead, he was deceased, and there were many people in the public space who would speak about this idea that justice was elusive and had been evaded because he was dead. However, I do know there were police investigations. They didn't result in convictions, of course, but in that case, you didn't have allegations about abusers who were possibly alive. And in this instance, I would really appeal to the police to work with Smile Up, and if Smile Up can facilitate those conversations with the individuals that have made these allegations, I think that would be a really good way forward. I mean, many of the individuals we've spoken to have spoken about inaction and not feeling that the police were necessarily wanting to hear them in the past. And I think that's a real problem. So I would welcome action from the police in Japan.
Megumi, do you want to add something to that?
No, not to Mobeen's points. I think he's summarised really well. But just to briefly talk about the third question, which I could get a refresher. I think it was about the media's environment.
It was about the fact that although the company has been terminated and renamed, it's now called Smile Up. It seems to be back on track with the media, and there are multiple relationships between a new company and TV companies. And the figure quoted was that there are 10 new TV programs featuring talent from Smile Up. I think I got that right. So what's your opinion on that?
I think that I realise that some TV companies are working with former Johnny Associates or Smile Up talents, and some companies are not. What I think is important is that this story is not over, and that is continue to be reported in the news. I think also a clarification over what the difference between Smile Up and Star 2 is needs to be had as well. I don't think that's something that's still sort of been set very clearly. So I think in that respect, the media still have an important role to play in continuing to investigate and report on this story.
Can I just add one thing very briefly, which is I want to make it really clear, and this is in response to the question, but also in response to some of the online chatter that I've seen. In terms of these documentaries, has never been about, and should never be about, talent at the company, be it historic or be it talent that's there today at Star 2. It's never been about those individuals. And, I certainly don't think it's helpful if we make those individuals, the people that are, the acts themselves, persona non grata. It is not about targeting those individuals. It's about a company, and I think there's serious questions that remain about financial benefits in the country, in the company, and that includes to individuals like Judy Fujishima. I think there's serious questions there that remain, and so I think what is very difficult in this situation is if there are survivors of abuse who are still awaiting compensation, and we know there are many, many who are going through that process, and they are seeing that talent from the agency is on television every day, I think that would stick in the throats of many people. And so I think there needs to be a degree of sensitivity in terms of the company itself making it very clear how the culture has changed, who is financially benefiting, and why they deem it okay to roll out this talent. But it has never been about targeting the individual talent. I just want to make that really clear.
Thank you. If we just continue the comparison with the BBC and Jimmy Savile, there were, of course, multiple programs, several programs after he died investigating what he did. Are you aware of any program like that in Japan? So in other words, an investigative program which kind of dug into the claims and presented them to the public in a broadcast forum. I'm thinking in particular of NHK because there have been, similar to the Jimmy Savile case, there have been claims, I've seen them in the news, that at least one victim was actually abused in the NHK building. Is that right?
So I have come across and watched some of those documentaries. I think NHK did a series on Close-Up Gendai, and TBS also did too. Well, the impression I got was that they were sort of looking into, they were Kinshaw programs, so looking into their company's response or relationship with Johnny and Associates. What hasn't happened though is an actual formal investigation, an external investigation into each of these broadcasters or companies. So it's sort of been left to, I think, the journalists within the company to do programs themselves. That's good, that's great, but I do think that there needs to be also an external investigation happening, as well as journalists who are within the company and trying to find out what's going on in their own company.
Thank you. And Megumi, did I catch you saying that some TV companies are not cooperating with Smile Up? Is that right? Or did I mishear that?
Oh no, I don't think I meant to say that.
Okay, so as far as aware, it's back on track. It's what the questioner said. The TV companies are kind of acting like nothing has changed. They're trying to move forward with Smile Up, or would that be an exaggeration?
I think it's difficult to say because being in London, I'm not following everything so closely. But it does feel like whilst there are lots of, as we've found, there are lots of questions to still be answered, still big issues related to Smile Up. Those questions are not being answered, and it feels like a new company has been set up and we can move on.
Okay, I'm just scanning the room for more questions. I'm just going to take other questions if you don't mind. I see Karen's hand on the back, I see Alice, and the lady in front. So if we take 1, 2, 3, is that all right? Karen first.
I'm calling from Japan Times, and I have two questions. By the way, thank you for today. So, like the sexual abuse accusations against other predators, whom I believe are like former managers, has been alleged since last year. It was included in the third-party investigation report in August, and I believe Shukan Bunshin also reported a story about a former predator as like Mr. X. Considering that it's been going on since like last year, do you think there's a lack of media coverage within the Japanese media focusing on other predators? And as for my second question, I was one of the victims, Nihongi-san, I think he mentioned that he knows the name of the predators. So I was wondering if you tried, did you consider including them in your documentary, and have you tried reaching out to them? That's it from me.
Sure. If I could take the first part of that question, if that would be okay. So I think there's something very telling, and I mean this, and I'm going to be very careful with my words, and I want to maintain absolute respect for journalists on the ground in Japan who have been covering this story. I think there's something very telling in that every interview that I've done since the release of The Shadow of a Predator, so in the last few weeks since the end of March, every Japanese journalist that I've spoken to has referenced the fact that the information about there being possible other predators, other abusers within the company, they have referenced the fact that this was in the public domain. And indeed, in terms of why we started chasing that story, it's because it was reported in an internal investigation. And if you looked at that investigation, it was like a footnote. It was a very small reference. I think it didn't even make up an entire paragraph. It was a couple of lines that referenced that there may have been other abusers within the company. And every single journalist in Japan that I've spoken to in recent weeks has said that they wish they'd picked up on that story. And so I still today feel, and I think this is a really crucial point, that as people, as a non-Japanese speaker, as someone that works for the BBC, as someone that is not resident in Japan, I still feel that there's a great deal of privilege almost in us being able to come to Japan and cover this story. But what I would like to see, and what I'm unsure of in terms of why it's happened this way, with the exception of certain publications, so Bunshin, for example, who have been doing brilliant work around this, with the exception of a few broadcasters or a few publications, people on the ground don't seem to be running with this story. And I feel that when this report was published, that was the story that the Japanese press itself could have and should have absolutely run with. And I'm really unsure, perhaps it's a cultural reason, I'm not sure, I'm really unsure why that didn't happen. And what I would like to see moving forward is journalists in Japan not waiting for the BBC or for external organizations to take the lead on this story. This story is there for the taking, and I want to see people on the ground running with it.
Thank you. The second question?
Sorry, could you repeat the second question?
Karen, do you want?
Yeah, so one of the victims, Nihongi-san, he mentioned that he knows the names of the former predators, the predators who were like former managers. And I was wondering if you, did you consider including them, the predators, in your story? Or have you tried reaching out to them? Because I don't know if you get to know the names of the predators, but yeah, I was just wondering about that.
No, that's a really important, interesting question. On this occasion, we didn't go down that road, but we think it is really, really important that it is taken, that it's been looked into and investigated further.
Mobeen, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just that I'm completely aware of a name in particular, which I'm not going to say today, but a name in particular which has been circulating in a small section of the press and certainly in the online space. And we're not in a position today to confirm or say this is information we have about a particular individual, because we don't. But that is absolutely a story I'd like to see the Japanese press run with and explore. I think that's an important part of public service journalism inside Japan.
So there is a name in the public domain. but it hasn't been properly checked out or investigated.
Exactly. So it would just be an allegation at this point.
Thanks, Karen. Is that right?
Thank you so much.
Alice was up next, I think, and then the lady in front.
Hi, Alice French from Nikkei Asia. Thanks very much, Mobeen and Megumi, for today and for your work over the past year. I have two questions, if I may. The first one speaks to what you were just saying, Mobeen, which is that there is an overall sense here that the company wouldn't have taken public responsibility for the scale of Kitagawa's abuse, let alone considered offering compensation were it not for your original documentary last year. And former President Fujishima actually admitted so in a press conference last September. And arguably you have had, again, maybe not quite sure why, but you have had more access to the company than a lot of domestic journalists. And I just want to ask whether you have any sense of perhaps resentment from the company towards the BBC for taking this public, or on the other side of that, have you seen any, I suppose, signs of remorse from them, or perhaps even gratitude for opening this up and giving them a chance to talk about it? My second question is about the business or kind of economic impact the scandal has had on the company. Obviously, it's not publicly listed, and so it's quite difficult to figure out sort of how well it's going or not. In your discussions with Higashiyama and people at Smile Up, did you get a sense that this was a company that was really sort of in a crisis and trying to save itself? Just from watching your interview, Higashiyama seemed very calm and collected, and he doesn't really seem like someone who's panicking to save the business. Thanks.
Sure. Thank you so much. And Megumi, if I could take the first part of that question, if that's okay. So I think there's a really interesting point here about how the company has responded. As we all saw when we were there during the making of the first documentary, there was what I would call a brick wall. So there was pretty much non-engagement. I think that really changed significantly this time around, and I think that is entirely to do with the level of pressure, and of course a lot of that is to do with the press in Japan running with this story. So, you know, when we approached them, they sent this one-line email back saying we will cooperate. I do want to share though this idea of, I think you asked specifically about remorse, and I want to share an anecdote which I think probably shed some light on that. I don't feel there's resentment from the company, but I also need to be very clear. I don't think there is a real grasp on the magnitude of what has happened and the idea that the company and the culture within the company has a part to play in that. So if I can share this anecdote, when we arrived in Japan in February, we did not know at that point if the company CEO or anyone senior from the company would be speaking to us. We just knew that there was a move to cooperate, whatever that might mean. And so we had a series of meetings off camera inside the headquarters, the former Johnny and Associates headquarters. And in those meetings, I would say some of the content of those very long meetings was bizarre. And so I remember, you know, initially that we'd have these meetings around a big board, in a big boardroom around a big table. There'd be external PR, internal PR, there'd be lawyers, there'd be friends of senior people at the company who would turn up to and express an opinion. And quite early on in that process, they said to us, we'd like you to meet some survivors of abuse. And of course, we're very open to speaking to any survivors of abuse. The format that took, I think, was wrong, because they insisted that the meetings with survivors of abuse would take place within the building with the PR team present. And actually there was quite a bit of back and forth, because we went to them and said, look, in terms of any survivors we've spoken to, for research purposes, we really insist and we really want to make sure they're able to speak openly and honestly, and that would mean there would be no camera there, it would mean there's no third parties there, it would mean there's no one to apply any pressure, and we would feel that it wouldn't be a good thing for that to happen in the office. They came back to us and said, this is the way they want to do it, this is the way these survivors themselves want to do it. And then we had another meeting where indeed 3 survivors of abuse were effectively wheeled out, and in these conversations, they told us that we had the wrong story. So this is with the PR team present. They said, whilst there were survivors of abuse, they wanted us to focus on, in their view, what were the many lies of people coming forward, the fact that there were so many people exploiting the situation. It really felt like they were trying to minimize what had happened. And that, to me, illustrates a point about company culture today, not historically, company culture today, because what I found was a company that is still obsessed primarily with public relations and reputational management. And that tells me that they haven't fully grasped the magnitude of what happened and the impact it's had on so many lives.
Thank you. Megumi, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't, and I think that also answered the second question as well. And I was in the room too. I think Higashiyama-san, he answered all our questions. It was a long interview, and we asked some difficult questions too. And we did get the sense that he wants to help, wants to change, but I was also left with a very strong impression that he's just not grasping the gravity of the situation that they're in, and Mobeen just gave examples of why we felt that.
Just to say, in terms of the economic impact, I certainly don't have. I don't think we have access to anything like company accounts. I do know that during the interview, I think it's in the extended cut, Higashiyama-san said he took on this role because he felt that so many people would lose their jobs, and that he felt it was his responsibility. It was quite, I would go as far as saying it was quite a paternal kind of take on why he was doing this job. He seemed to present it with some sense of self-sacrifice, as if he was kind of saving the company. So I don't know if, I think the implication there at least was there has been a financial impact, but we don't have any details on the specifics.
Is that a story that a journalist could dig into, do you think? I mean, I know it's not a public company.
I think absolutely. So I would, in terms of financial journalists and data journalists inside Japan, I think it is really worth looking at if there has been any financial impact. I do have to say, and this is definitely in the extended cut, one of the questions I asked about finance is if Julie Fujishima, of course, the former CEO who resigned and Johnny Kitagawa's niece, if she financially benefits today from Star 2 and Smile Up, and he wouldn't answer that question. And so, the fact is, and this is a matter of public record, this information is out there, that Julie Fujishima she owns the company. She owns the company even to this day, and this is someone who was part of the family and has been around and been in the company and been a senior figure at the company for a very, very long time, whilst we know this abuse was continuing. So I think that, again, there's a moral question there about the ethics of that and whether that should continue. I really want someone in Japan to consider this and to run with the story.
Thank you. The lady at the front, you're waiting for a question?
I am Amane Shimoseki from Asahi Shimbun. Thank you for today. And my question about Start Entertainment. So Start Entertainment is doing a big live concert today in Tokyo. And although the Start Entertainment and Smile Up have separated their businesses, but the compensation issue still underway, and the sexual assault by the two staff members still being relieved. So some victims have expressed mixed feeling about having this kind of live concert. So what do you think about doing a big concert at this time?
Thank you. So it's another kind of business as usual question. It does seem like they're trying to go on as if nothing has happened. I
it's a really sensitive topic, isn't it? Because there are so many, as we know, there are nearly 1,000 survivors that have come forward to Smile Up, and they're still going through a compensation process. In the meanwhile, there is a huge launch party concert happening as well. So it does feel rather insensitive, and as always, it's I think the standing by the survivors and helping them achieve a sense of justice is the most important thing.
Thank you. Mobeen, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think just very briefly, again, this isn't about the individuals, and in response to some of the conversations that I've seen online, it's important to say that we are not for a second suggesting that individuals who might not even have been born when some of this abuse was taking place should bear the responsibility for that. I do think, though, that there's major questions about the ethics of a company splitting and having two different arms of the company because it benefits them financially and allows them to continue business as usual, particularly when we know that there are lawyers, for example, who are representing survivors of abuse, who said that the whole process is like a black box. And so if you can imagine people who've been brave enough to come forward, not knowing what the result of their claim is going to be, not knowing a time frame, if you imagine some of those people turning on the television or seeing billboards for these concerts, I think that feels really insensitive, and it feels like the company has its priorities wrong, actually. So, perhaps there could be some system in which there is a pause on all the fanfare and a pause on business as usual, and they deal primarily with compensating survivors of abuse. I think that might be a more ethical way to move forward.
Thank you. And presumably you did ask Fujishima-san, I should say, to come on camera, did you? And she declined?
Absolutely. There was a long conversation and multiple negotiations around Julie Fujishima speaking on camera, and for various reasons, which I think it would be probably unfair to share publicly, but for various reasons they declined and suggested Higashiyama-san would be the best representative.
Thank you. Okay, just scanning the room. This gentleman, Ogawa-san, you've had a question before, but there's no other hands.
Hi, I'm Toshio Wata with Arc Times. Thank you for doing this today. I have two questions. So, Mobeen, you just mentioned that the whole process is a kind of black box, and they claim that the former, like a joint associate, will be dissolved, and they have created Smile Up and Star Entertainment, and they claim that the Star Entertainment and Smile Up is totally different company, but they didn't give us any details on that, and they refused to do so. And one of the reason why you did the Predator last year was that one of the major themes was break of silence by Japanese media. And actually the black box, so what I mean by that is the relation between Smile Up and Star Entertainment. Well, that was, Star Entertainment was partly created by the request by Japanese TV stations. Japanese TV station executives explicitly said that in the press conferences that they wanted the company to separate, but that's just a superficial separation. But they wanted them to do so. Then all those TV networks executives are now saying that the compensation is in progress. They use almost all the same expression when they express what's going on right now. So given the fact that you saw the victims and survivors, but at the same time, it seems to me Japanese TV station is now back in the business as usual, and even cooperating with Johnny Associates to cover up the whole things. What do you make of the situation right now, and the break of silence walls by Japanese media, especially by TV stations, are Now, what's going on? What do you make of the situation right now? That's my first question. And second one is that so Mobeen, you interviewed Higashiyama, and in the interview you used expression like bring justice. I think the word justice several times. But for Higashiyama, it seems to me his justice only turned to the internal staffers or his colleagues. But you use the expression bring justice to Johnny and Associates for victims. I think there was a huge gap or conception gap between the two, between you and Higashiyama. What did you feel about that?
Sure, I really appreciate your question. So the first part of that, I think you highlight something really, really important and crucial, which could explain, I think, a lot of the frustrations that I was expressing earlier about the Japanese press not running with this. And I believe that there is a symbiotic relationship between the world of television and entertainment programs, and formerly Johnny and Associates, today Star 2 and less so Smile Up. But there is this symbiotic relationship, which means that the kind of constant supply of people who have debuted for dramas, for music shows, for concerts, for content on talk shows, there is this kind of production line, and the scandal upset that production line. That's what it did. It for a second, or for a few months at least, it hit pause, and the conversation in some circles shifted from it being about this kind of dream world of constant entertainment and perfection to being about the ugly underbelly, actually, of what was going on inside the company. Now, I think there are many people within the entertainment industry outside of the company and outside of Star 2 who want this to simply go away, because it harms the business model. It harms the idea that there is this perfect world in which these people, purely their purpose in life is just to entertain us all. As we know, that isn't the case. We're talking about human beings here. And so I think there needs to be a real shift. And I personally believe, and this is from speaking to many of the journalists who I've done interviews with inside Japan, and Japanese journalists in the UK as well, so many of them will then have a conversation with me about how even today it is difficult to have conversations around this kind of subject matter with their editors, because there remains a fear even now of who might be upset and how that could lead to access being broken down to particular stars. And I think that is a real problem, and is the primary reason that we've seen the rate of change be so slow. And can I just get a reminder about the second part of that question?
Second question was about the gulf in perception during the interview you had with
justice.
Higashiyama-san. With the concept of justice.
Completely. So I don't want to repeat myself from earlier too much, but I really felt that Higashiyama-san is, of course, someone who has come through the Johnny and Associates system. He's someone that was very closely linked to Johnny Kitagawa himself, and he is a star within his own right. And because of all that, I understand why he could be a figurehead for this company. What I do not understand is how he is qualified in any meaningful way to understand and to deliver justice for survivors of abuse. It's just not his area of expertise. And as a result of that, I completely agree. There was a huge gap between what I was asking about and implying and what I was talking about when we referenced individuals we'd spoken to and the quest for justice and what justice looks like. There's a huge gap between that and what Higashiyama-san believed justice looked like. For him, he did speak a lot about staff at the company and ensuring that they had jobs moving forward, ensuring that the company's legacy would be changed, and all of those things. I think from the survivor's perspective, it's more about allowing some form of closure And what do we know about that? That requires, it's not only about money, although part of this is about money, it's also about things like counseling. It's also about things like support in terms of being able to speak to their families. And also, you know, in regard to people who are coming forward and saying there were other abuses, in those instances, it's also about criminality and people being held accountable. And all of those things are things that Higashiyama-san didn't really engage with.
Just quickly, did you submit your
I
question
can't allow you.
beforehand?
I can't allow you to monopolize the press conference, sorry.
Just a quick, because there was a lot of speculation that whether you submit questions before you meet with Higashiyama. How because you mentioned long meeting took place beforehand.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, so just to be really brief, we were very clear from the word go that we would not submit questions. We said to them that we would allow them to understand question areas, and those would cover things like the quest for justice, the experience of survivors. But we said that we wanted the interview to be an open conversation, and therefore it would be ridiculous to suggest that we would have a set list of questions. It just wouldn't work. So although it was requested, we refused to submit questions.
Thank you. Any more questions from the room? If you would like to ask a question, can you raise your hand to indicate, please? While we're waiting, just let me ask a very sensitive question, but did you feel that you needed to ask Higashiyama-san himself if he was a victim? Or did you think that was just off the record, off the cards?
It's really interesting you raised that. So in the extended cut, you do see the moment, and I'm very careful with my wording. So I say to him, I only want you to answer this if you're comfortable. And then I ask him if he had any experiences of abuse with Johnny Kitagawa, and he said he absolutely says he didn't, and he was very quick to answer that. So I was careful to make sure that he was comfortable, but he did answer the question.
All right, thank you. Can we just go back to the issue of the police? Were you able to approach the police, or did you not think that was in your remit? I mean, it is kind of odd, I guess, that the police have not launched a formal investigation. Right now, of course, the main perpetrator is dead, so there is that. But in the wake of Jimmy Savile, there was a police investigation, wasn't there, into his historic crimes, and that uncovered more new crimes, yeah? So are you able, I know it's outside your expertise, you're a long way away, but are you able to comment on the sort of lack of police action, or the apparent lack of police action?
So for Predator, the first documentary that we made, which came out last year, we approached the police because obviously they're a big part of the story as well. We were told that it would be difficult for us as journalists outside of Japan to be able to speak to them, which we found very odd. For Predator 2, because of for Shadow of the Predator, for our experiences that we went through with Predator, our first Predator, we were left thinking we couldn't approach them again. But I do think, again, as you say, we're not. The situation in Japan is different to the situation in London, but it does feel like an abuse story of this scale, of this volume, the police not moving does feel odd to me.
Thank you, Megumi. Anything to add to that, Mobeen?
No, I think Meg covered it. Thank you.
All right. Can you comment on the claims? You do hear them a little bit in your program, but can you can you discuss the sort of claims that the company is trying to penny pinch on the compensation, or to tone down the compensation claims? As we said, 1,000 people apparently have come forward, or that 1,000 people have come forward. Are you able to comment on that at all, on the fact that some of them appear to be the victim of penny pinching?
Yeah, I mean, I would say certainly the information that we found, and this is all from conversations with survivors themselves, from a lawyer that is representing a group of survivors, and then from the conversations we had at the company. it didn't seem so much to be about minimizing the amount of compensation itself. That didn't seem to be the issue. The issue seemed to be a culture in which people who were coming forward were discouraged, and actually kind of establishing a precedent where there is a feeling where if you decide you're going to come forward, or even before that, if you're in the process of making that decision and deciding that you want to come forward and contact the company, there seems to be a culture which is being nurtured, which is to let people know that it's going to be difficult, that they're going to be discouraged. And we see that, for example, in the statement that Smile Up put on their website. I know the statement was subsequently removed, but the idea of, the phrase that was used was false stories and testimony being stolen from genuine survivors. And I think what that does is it adds to the sense of stigma, it adds to the sense of difficulty. I just want to say, we have to imagine that if there are adults who are sending that initial email or who are making that initial call, it takes a huge amount of courage. It really does. This is a life-changing thing that they'll be doing, because they'll be starting a process potentially where, yes, there'll be compensation. They'll be starting a process where they'll start counselling. It could change their relationship with their families. It's going to change, many things that they may have and will have in many cases, kept away from the surface of their life will now be brought back to the surface. So it's a huge undertaking. And so I think for the company to create a culture in which essentially they're saying, we don't believe that all of you are telling the truth here, or that many of you are telling the truth here, I don't think that's progressive or compassionate. And I think in this instance, we have to be led by compassion. Of course we do.
Megumi?
Yeah, I mean, I've said this before, at the heart of this is about protecting children, protection of children. It's, and Smile Up and Star 2 are still companies that are responsible of young talent and developing them. For a company to, in this situation, as Mobeen says, have a culture where the compensation process is an interrogation, what seems like more of an interrogation, rather than a way to understand whether what the survivors are going through, I think is a huge misstep. Yeah, it's again not actually grasping their responsibility and their duty that they have to the carer survivors and the current talent that they're responsible of.
Thanks. I just want to add one very brief thing. Just going back to the idea of the Smile Up, creating a situation in which they introduced us to survivors of abuse. One of the people, with all good intention, I'm sure, actually used a very particular phrase. They said the abuse was bad, but it wasn't that bad, and it's been exaggerated. And I think this idea that there's been an exaggeration is itself really insensitive and really illustrates that there's a huge lack of understanding about the impact this has had on people's lives.
Just on that on the subject of the company recruiting people, one of the big issues, of course, was the lack of media scrutiny, over these historical allegations, which went back a long time, right? They were publicly aired 20, 30, 40 years ago, and that, of course, allowed the company to keep recruiting these children from their legal guardians. Have you seen any evidence that recruitment has fallen off, or did you interview any parents who express concern about their children now going into the company, or is that also business as usual, do you think?
I think that's a really important and interesting thing to look at. On this occasion, we didn't go down that route, but again, I would love to learn more about that.
And Mobeen, you seem surprised by the reaction of some of the fans. They seem to be also kind of putting it behind them and not that concerned.
I do. I'd say there's a real dividing line. So, in the world we live in now, hyper-connected world, every morning I will have messages on X or emails from people who are either saying, they're really pleased this story continues to be covered, and other individuals who are saying, you know, they are either survivors of abuse or that they have had really negative experiences on the streets, for example, or there's a culture of overlooking misogyny or sexual abuse or the persecution of gay people. You know, it's really become a kind of lightning rod in terms of lots of different social issues in Japan, and lots of people reach out to me. So that will be one camp. But then I have to say, in terms of a lot of the chatter on social media, there seems to be many fans who are taking this extremely personally and see this as an attack on the acts that they love. And in that sense, it feels like there's a whole section of the fandom that just wants this to go away. They just see it as kind of annoying white noise, and they just want it to end. And I would appeal directly to all those people to really consider the impact this is having on people's lives.
Thank you. Megumi, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Mobeen summarised it well, thank you.
All right, just one last question. There is an ongoing scandal here which you may be aware of, completely unrelated, of course, to the one we're discussing, by a famous comedian, Matsumoto Hiroshi. Have you come across that at all? And do you think it's in any way relevant, not just what happened, but the follow-up by the media? Because Matsumoto-san has actually temporarily retired following the media coverage.
So I have been watching, reading bits about it from the UK. I think what's happening is like an extension of Mobeen was talking about, really, about how there is this symbiotic relationship between the media and the entertainment industry, and there is this production line of entertainment. And in the case of Matsumoto Hiroshi, he is his company is a huge talent agency as well, a comedian agency called Yoshimoto Kogyo. And so I think that it's a similar a similar situation is happening there. But I can't speak in detail furthermore than that, as I'm not actually aware of all the details.
I would just add one thing, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but I do think there's a disconnect between some of the testimony that I've seen online and people coming forward in the social media space and saying they were affected and saying this is a kind of Me Too movement for Japan. There seems to be a disconnect between that and then a lot of the reporting. And whether it's Smile Up or whether it's any other scandals in this area, I would really appeal to journalists on the ground in Japan to chase these stories, because I think they're worthwhile stories. And when we have these uncomfortable, difficult conversations in any society, including here in the UK, that is how society moves forward. It's the job of journalists to hold up a mirror to society, even when the reflection may be ugly and when those conversations might be difficult. And that's a universal thing that isn't exclusive to Japan, and it's certainly not exclusive to the UK and Europe. But it is our job as journalists, and I would appeal to all of us who have a platform, who have a publication, who work for a TV station or a radio station to do our jobs and chase those stories.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Mobeen and Megumi for getting up early to join us today. What time is it there, guys?
It's just coming up to 8 o'clock.
Just turning 8,
yeah.
And I think it's safe to say that Megumi is a new mom, so it was especially difficult for you to do this. Thanks everyone for doing that. Can I just remind everybody present that the full documentary is available to watch on BBC News channel, which I'm told is available on Amazon Prime Video in Japan. Is that correct? So you can watch it. Does that have subtitles? Do either of you know, or is it just it has subtitles?
Yes.
Okay, so it is available to watch if you would like to do that. Any last words before we let you go?
Thank you so much. I just want to say thank you to everyone, and I do just really appeal to journalists on the ground to continue running with this story and continue fighting for justice. I really do.
Same here. The story isn't over. We'll certainly be watching it from London, but I hope that journalists in Japan also do. And thank you again for having us here today.
Well, thank you both. The story isn't over. I think that's the message from you both. The story isn't over, yeah? Okay, thank you so much, and do show your appreciation for today's speakers. Thanks.